Today, we take a closer look at one of boxing's most historic fights, a match that ended in a dramatic sequence that's still debated to this day. The 12th and final round in the bout between the legendary heavyweight champion, Jack Johnson, and his challenger, the great Michigan assassin, middleweight champion Stanley Ketchel. On October 16, 1909, at the Mission Street Arena in Colma, California, Jack Johnson defended his heavyweight title against Stanley Ketchel. For 11 rounds, the fight was a tactical exercise, but in the final moments, it escalated into a fierce brawl. The entire sequence, however, resembled that of a Hollywood Western saloon brawl. From Ketchel's haymaker right cross to Johnson's lack of defensive reaction, followed by the champion's recovery and counterattack, something didn't seem quite right. While no one questioned that Ketchel had been knocked out, newspaper accounts from ringside immediately cast doubt on Johnson's sudden trip to the canvas, and many spectators were likewise suspicious. The San Francisco Call published extensive reports over several days, with one headline reading, "Fans failed to see the blow that staggered Johnson." The consensus was that Johnson staged the knockdown. Today, over a century later, the story has been completely flipped. Eyewitness testimony has since been brushed aside, and Ketchel has been recast as an opportunist. High-profile documentaries, such as Ken Burns' Unforgivable Blackness, have justifiably highlighted Johnson as an important historical figure and as a great champion. But in this fight, he is portrayed as unfairly sucker-punched by an excitable middleweight who, quote, strayed from the script. What exactly that script was never verified. But when studying the fight film, along with existing eyewitness testimony and newspaper accounts, a story behind the scenes begins to take shape. Jack Johnson won the heavyweight title from Tommy Burns in 1908, and in early 1909, boxing promoters sought a challenger. Despite being a clear mismatch, Stanley Ketchel, the popular middleweight champion, was chosen. Many fans were intrigued by the colorful personalities of both fighters. On April 17, 1909, Johnson and Ketchel met to sign the contract for their fight, to take place in Colma, California, the following October. Despite rumors, the fight would be a legitimate title defense, not an exhibition. Johnson, 3 inches taller and 25 to 35 pounds heavier, had a clear size advantage. To help Ketchel appear more competitive for the press, promoters had him wear multiple layers, including undershirts, sweaters, and boots with lifts. In the months before the fight, Stanley Ketchel's manager, Willis Britt, grew concerned about the risks Ketchel faced. He met and asked Johnson to let Ketchel perform well without causing his fighter serious harm. Johnson agreed, later writing that he deliberately refrained from punishing Ketchel more than was necessary. A year after the fight, Johnson's former manager, George Little, testified that Johnson's knockdown had been staged. He claimed that rehearsals had taken place for a double knockdown to end the fight, but that Ketchel had refused to fake his knockout, insisting that any knockout had to be real. The story was also supported by witnesses from inside Johnson's training camp, including sparring partners Denver Jack O'Keefe and Gunboat Smith, who both recalled rehearsals during training. Unlike Little, O'Keefe and Smith had no grievance with Johnson, sharing their accounts in interviews years later. Sadly, both Ketchel and Willis Britt died within the year before giving testimony, and Ketchel, having reportedly never seen the films, said he wasn't sure where he hit Johnson. Then there's the testimony of Jack Johnson himself, who confessed his version of events in his 1927 autobiography, In the Ring and Out. Johnson claimed that the knockdown had been his own secret plan to, quote, make the picture snappy and worth seeing. Taken all together, the testimonies imply an agreement among the parties to manage the length and the course of the fight, and to produce a knockout finish with a dash of stagecraft. The motive, money from the films, was no secret. The most neglected witness, however, has been the surviving film of the fight. Discussed in books, shown on television, and in documentaries, these motion pictures have been viewed by millions over the last century. Rarely, though, has the footage been examined in detail, and when viewed closely in high definition, the film has its own story to tell. On a brisk, overcast October day in 1909, the fight begins. The size difference between the two men is striking. Try as he might, Ketchel struggles to close the distance between himself and Johnson, feinting, pawing, and lunging forward, mostly with his left, hoping to score on the inside or force Johnson into a slugging match. Johnson, however, would have none of it. Jack moved about with ease, often planting himself in place, patty-caking with open gloves, picking off Ketchel's leads, and repeatedly beating Stanley to the punch. In the second round, Ketchel closes the distance, but Johnson comes forward and Stanley tumbles to the canvas. With Johnson in control, he kept his promise to Willis Britt, allowing Ketchel to make a good showing. But the contest resembled a cruel sparring session. Ketchel, a tough and determined competitor, endured the fight through a steady barrage of punishment. To understand what happened in the 12th round, it's important to compare that moment to similar exchanges earlier in the fight. Here, in the 8th round, Stanley throws an overhand right and misses, sending him forward off balance. Again, later in the round, Ketchel tries and misses while Johnson pulls back, avoiding the punch. In both cases, the men were facing each other, as they would in the 12th, but Johnson evaded and countered Stanley's punches with ease. In this rare third-round footage, Stanley throws the same overhand right he would in the 12th. But here, Johnson slips the blow and, smiling, wraps Ketchel into a clinch. By the 10th round, Ketchel, growing desperate, lunges and misses with the looping left. The moment was captured by a ringside photographer, and the photo was published in newspapers the following day. The finish was captured in remarkable detail for the period, but the choppy frame rate of about 12 frames per second, the distant view from the ring, and the speed of the action make it nearly impossible to analyze the knockdown in real time. Captured at high definition, however, the film is revealing when viewed frame by frame. Moments into the 12th round, the final exchange begins. As the two fighters struggle in a clinch, Johnson glances over toward Ketchel's corner. Not once, but twice. Johnson allows Ketchel to step back. The two men pose, looking directly at each other, in perfect position for the cameras. According to newspaper accounts, someone in Ketchel's corner yelled, "Now then, Stanley." At that moment, Ketchel steps forward, leading with his left, confident that he has an open target. Johnson reacts immediately, planting his back foot just as he did in the earlier exchanges. He knows the punch is coming. Johnson makes no attempt to block or counter Stanley's punch. Instead, Johnson turns his head to the right and then down, away from Ketchel. Breaking the golden rule of defensive fighting, never take your eyes off your opponent, Johnson appears to be bracing for the punch rather than avoiding it. With Ketchel's right glove only halfway to its target, Johnson bends his left leg and begins to drop. As Johnson falls to the canvas, Ketchel's arm windmills over the back of Johnson's head. The momentum carries Ketchel forward, stumbling away as Johnson spills to the canvas. It's clear that Johnson's fall was a choice, not the result of a punch which never struck him directly. Johnson breaks his fall, gestures as if to stand up, then drops back, rolls over, and slowly gets to his feet. Despite arriving at the most important moment of his career, Ketchel seems neither excited nor anxious to follow through. The middleweight hikes up his trunks and strolls casually behind the referee, all the while looking over to his corner as if to ask, "Now what?" Ketchel steps toward Johnson, likely believing the fight will continue as before, but Johnson lunges forward, quickly driving a right to Ketchel's jaw. The moment of impact has been cut from the film. As Ketchel collapses, Johnson continues to swing, the momentum carrying him up and over the top of Ketchel's body, with the two once again crashing to the canvas. Johnson rises and steps back. He stands and wipes away two of Ketchel's teeth embedded in his glove as referee Jack Welsh finishes the count. As seconds and officials enter the ring, Ketchel is brought to his feet and walks to his corner. The notion that Jack Johnson was double-crossed or caught off guard by Stanley Ketchel's well-telegraphed right cross is unlikely, given the witness testimony and the film evidence that shows Johnson ducking and falling before Ketchel's punch even arrived. The fight was made for its financial promise, not because it was a fair contest. The fighters and promoters did what they had to do. Johnson agreed to carry the fight for at least 12 rounds, and that's what he did. Stanley Ketchel fought in the hopes of winning, but he knew of the knockdown plan and went along with it, if reluctantly. Jack Johnson was a victim of racial injustice, but inside the business of boxing, he usually got what he wanted. Stanley Ketchel was set up to lose from the beginning. The middleweight champion withstood a bloody pounding and humiliation for 12 rounds. In the end, he did what he was told, on signal, to throw a punch at Jack Johnson. He submitted to his staged moment of glory, only to be beaten into unconsciousness moments later.